Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with celebrated jazz drummer, percussionist, composer, bandleader, and educator Yoron Israel. We had a solid conversation about life well lived in the world of music, COVID, and his new 2021 CD called New Dreams. He is a native Chicagoan, and he is one of the most gifted and sought-after musicians in the music industry today. Since 2000, he has maintained a busy schedule performing and recording with the best in his home of Boston. He has great stories about what he's learned from the masters and so much more. Enjoy.
Thanks for taking a minute out today, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Great. Thanks for having me and considering for us to get together. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet, man. I really enjoyed New Dreams. It's just, in this day and era with, what's been going on in our lives, it's just a feel-good album. So I guess my first question to you is, how does it feel to have this come out now during a time where things are kind of slowing down to a point where there can be live music and people really are continuing to embrace new recordings?
Yeah, it's really great the way it all came up, the timing of everything. When I first started working on this record, it was actually 2018 was probably the first tracks where that appear on this record were recorded back in 2018. At the time, I knew that I wanted to, that was pre-pandemic, obviously. But I knew that I wanted this record to have a certain message or a unique message or inspiring message even then. Lo and behold, then the pandemic hit, and I hadn't done much work on formalizing the record up to that point, maybe some mixing here and there. But then when the pandemic hit, most of the work with the record was completed during that time. And then once things were completed, that message or that inspiring notion that I had, it like materialized instantly. It all came together. So I'm really the timing and how things all kind of fit together. It was like, wow, you have to put this out because just the way that it all came together. Obviously, you had in mind for at that point it was just I want to put out something that would reflect a positive message, an inspiring message. But then, a year and a half later or 2 years later, it became not only is it an inspiring message, it's a message now that everybody worldwide can relate to some extent, because we truly have to reboot, so to speak, and, have, okay, what do we do now, which would formulate, new dreams, new hopes, new aspirations, We all have to, no matter what profession you're in, no matter what walk of life you're in, it's just amazing. The whole world is of that mindset, or most of the world, of that mindset. Okay, what do we do now? We've all been through this thing. How do we, reboot, and how do we rechannel, and how do we change? What do we need to change? How do we go from here? Where do we go from here, kind of thing.
So ultimately, what do you want the listener to get from this album? There's a lot of choices that people can decide upon out there, and when they do land on yours and download or buy it, what do you want them to get?
I want them to get a sense of hope and a sense of newness, of thinking the period that we've all gone through, that, it is in fact a new day, and so with the new day comes new hopes, new dreams, which is, the title of the recording, obviously. So with, every new day breeds, new aspirations. So that's what I would want the listener to get, really just thinking about each day as an opportunity towards, moving towards something new, not to dwell on, especially old situations that are not constructive, but to actually understand that, well, if we woke up this morning, we have an opportunity to experience something new, and to be not just experience, but to actually be a motivating force of something new.
So you're a native of one of my favorite cities on this planet. You're from Chicago. Talk to me a little bit about how your journey into music, and more specifically jazz, really started and took hold in you.
Wow, that's great. And actually, you're in one of my second favorite cities or third favorite cities, or one of my favorite cities as well, Kansas City. Just a quick side note, my parents, when I got to college, my parents actually moved to Kansas City and they lived there for over 10 years. So I got a chance to know Kansas City pretty well, visiting them and spending long periods of time there. So I always feel Kansas City in some ways is like a second, third home in a way. I feel right at home when I come there. Getting back to Chicago. Yeah, Chicago, when I was growing up, and I think there's some of this still there, growing up as a musician was, I look back on that now and I'm really so appreciative because it's a rich music heritage there. I mean, all music, so many different musics. And one of the things that I appreciated, or that I can really appreciate now, even as an educator, is that I was exposed to a lot of different styles of music. And once I said, I'm going to be a musician, the expectation was to actually engage in all styles of music. I mean, on a very high level, not just to kind of play at it, but the dominant concept was, well, if you're a musician, you should be able to be called to play anything. You can play a top 40 gig one day and then do a jazz gig the next, and then do a rock function the next, and do a Latin thing the next day. So that was kind of the expectation. But lo and behold, by the time, and I kind of grew up with that pretty much in my formative years. By the time I got to high school, we had a pretty outstanding music program at a high school called Lane Technical High School, and we had award-winning concert band, award-winning symphony orchestra. But we had teachers there. We also had a jazz band, a gospel group, different groups, a theater outlet we had. It was really quite an outstanding place. But the jazz band at that age really formulated some lasting inspiration and practices in my life, because we had people that were practitioners teaching the jazz band and the combos. So it was an expectation that we took the music seriously. So at that point, I started to really investigate the music we call jazz. I mean, in terms of, I didn't have a lot of records available to me in my home. The public library became a very familiar place to me because, they had, there were like amazing record collections in our library, especially the main library that I had access to. And so that's when I really got into the history of the music, and really, you could take the LPs out and keep them for a couple weeks, and start to really investigate the people who were cornerstones of the music. And probably from a drum standpoint, probably starting with Buddy Rich and moving from Buddy Rich to Max Roach, and from Max Roach to Philly Joe Jones, and to Elvin Jones, to Roy Haynes. I mean, these were all because these people were on these records, that the repertoire that we were playing in our bands, these drummers were noted on who played on the recordings of those that featured those songs. The drummers of Charlie Parker, the drummers of Thad Jones. I got to, know who Mel Lewis was at an early age, So these were the drummers of John Coltrane, the drummers of even people we played songs like, say, by Jimmy Heath. I learned who Percy Heath, and also, who the Heath brothers were. That was just information that Tootie Heath is who I was thinking about, the drummer. And so all this information was coming to me probably from about my freshman year of high school, and it just blossomed and bloomed, and I became a addict, if you will, but in a good way, of jazz, and really it became something that I just became and still, that was the beginning of becoming a student of the music, which is ongoing even to this day. So that's how it happened with me, and then from there, of learning the history, learning the music, learning learning the sounds of different musicians and then emulating that, started the process of getting together with like-minded people. Some of them were my peers, a few. There was a few people even who are known even probably by your audience even now, who we grew up together and were in that period and knew each other back in Chicago, and now they've gone on to do great things and continue to do great things. So my peer group, but more, I shouldn't say more importantly, but really important at that time, I started to perform and become mentored really by some great artists who were beyond my age. And that really served me very, very well, because you can listen to the music, you can practice the music, but to perform the music at a high level, you learn, it's like a jump start. I mean, you learn so much more, and you learn the music in such a deeper way when you're experiencing it, especially with players who are, who have many years on you. And, some of those people I was listening to in person and, knew those people in person and things like that. So I started playing with people like Von Freeman, and so many other, Hobie James, these are local players that many people have never heard of. But, of course, Von Freeman, I'm sure, is a name that many listeners should know. But there's so a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of great musicians who mentored me, who I was very fortunate to be mentored by in Chicago. So I'm fortunate for that, and went on to go to college. I went to Roosevelt University in Chicago and earned a bachelor's degree there. During that time, just continually, being in the college music program, we didn't have per se a jazz program or jazz. We had a jazz program, but not a jazz major. So my undergraduate degree is actually in orchestral percussion, which I actually enjoyed and played in a number of orchestras growing up in Chicago as well, symphony orchestras. I played in Chicago Civic Orchestra, which is the training orchestra for the Chicago Symphony. This whole idea of diversity remained and still remains a part of my DNA, really. But at the same time, jazz is definitely the passion and really the foundation of much of what I do. So that's kind of my start in Chicago. After graduating from Roosevelt, I went on to New York, and I had the pleasure of performing with pretty much a who's who of jazz. It's just interesting for me. Some of the players who I wind up touring with and recording with and playing with, in those formative years, I actually consciously learned their music. I had no idea I would be playing with them, 10 years later or what have you. Or, I actually intentionally, set forth and I learned, all the music I could of Horace Silver, and lo and behold, years later, I wind up, on the bandstand and touring the world with Horace Silver. But I remember, as a youngster, taking the time to really learn that music because I loved it. And I just wanted to see how one thing, how the 50s went into the 60s and how the 60s went into the 70s, of his evolution. Other people that I did that with was actually Ahmad Jamal. Again, I just loved the music. Had no idea I was preparing myself to actually tour and record with him. Yeah, so with Ahmad Jamal, I remember, taking the time to learn his music, at a young age. And, Sonny Rollins, who I also played with and toured with, and same kind of thing. So, those formative years in Chicago were so important and really set the foundation for so much that I couldn't see would come, but so much that came later. So in New York, I started to formulate my own bands as well, and touring and recording with the great people. I can't leave out the great Abby Lincoln and Art Farmer, who actually just this past Sunday we did a tribute concert to Art Farmer at William Patterson University, and as part of the archival induction of his works, and that was just Sunday. So I was in his last quintet, and some of us who were in that quintet, actually all of us who were in that last quintet, were actually performed this concert on this past Sunday. So that was a treat. To answer your question about Chicago, it formulated a sound basis, both in terms of academia, in terms of personal development and practice, and in terms of, mentorship.
Yeah, and you mentioned so many legendary names that you've been with, and the list is it's huge, from Tom Harrell all the way down to, just everybody under the sun. And my question to you as an educator is, what did these musicians, these legends and luminaries give you, whether directly or by osmosis, that you in turn give younger players and students that you're around?
That you never stop growing. You cannot stop growing. Sometimes in academic environments, sometimes, students can't see the end because they're in it. So it's good to be that person who can say, well, look, this is just the beginning. There's more. What I saw on a daily basis when I was touring and still when I get a chance to do so even now, is that even these legends, the Sonny Rollins, the Art Farmers, we talked about this actually Sunday as part of the celebration of the day. We did interviews and things like that. And the one thing about all of these musicians, especially the horn players, because you can hear them, is that they never stopped practicing, not just like warming up, but diligently seeking to get better. I mean, they were at the pinnacle of being the greats and established greats, but they were still searching for more. They were still, wanting to expand, their knowledge, expand, their what they knew, expand, their vocabulary. So it was like, wow, as a youngster myself, being in my 20s, playing with these and touring with these giants, I was like, wow, I mean, here it is, he's still working on his craft, it never ends. And, so it doesn't, so to actually communicate that to students, I think is a very powerful message in itself. Also, just to let students know that, as with me, to take learning repertoire of people, of artists. Now, the artists have changed, it's no more Art Farmer, and some of these, John Coltrane. Yeah, the artists have changed, but they need to actually, I think, train themselves to learn the music of maybe who they inspire to play with. It could be a Kenny Garrett. It could even be a Herbie Hancock. You might inspire to, one day play with Herbie Hancock. He's still doing it, So it would behoove you to learn the music of these artists and know, not just on the surface, but really get into that repertoire, because you never know when you might have a chance to actually do that, once you finish your studies here. So those kind of messages are really important. And then also the final thing that I learned and that I try to impart to my students is the fact that when these artists hit the bandstand, they played and continue to play. And I think we all, some of us who have rubbed shoulders with this and saw it firsthand, they treated every situation like it was the last, and it makes a lot of sense because we know tomorrow is not promised to any of us. That was really obvious. So the music was so important, is so important, and was so important to these various artists that I've had a chance to play with and have a chance to play with, that, no matter what went on, no matter what challenges happened during the day, no matter what they were going through, when we hit the bandstand, that's all that mattered. To play on that level night after night after night after night after night, I mean, you have no other choice but to live up or not. You know, it's only two choices. Either you live up to the standard or you don't. And if you didn't, chances are, you know, you might not be at the next one. So to have that kind of accountability, it was so amazing to experience that firsthand. When you're talking about, you know, playing with an Abby Lincoln, you know, the great vocalist, she gave it all every time. You know, every time that we hit the bandstand, even during the sound checks. You know, even the sound checks were intense with you know, because it was like every time you hit the stage, you know. So there's no time to relax. I mean, relax in the music, so the music sounds relaxed, but there was no time to think of what you did as a hobby, so to speak, or just something you did. But it was very serious every time, you know, whether it's a sound check, whether it's a rehearsal, whether it's especially if when it became a performance, because it was, you know, we don't know if this is the last time, but if it's the last time, we're going to leave it all on the stage. So that concept, that's not easy these days or in a academic setting. It's not always easy to simulate that in our environment. So it helps to really kind of set the stage for students in that manner, because, you know, that's not the environment that we're in, obviously, you know. So it helps to have people like myself and others in these roles of being educators, because they can set the stage and kind of give the students some parameters of why we are doing this and why this is important and what you should be thinking about and how serious you should take this and how much of an opportunity this is for you. You know, you're standing on an amazing history. So I think those are the kind of lessons that I look to impart in my students.
You know, the one thing you mentioned, too, with the Art Farmer performances is that, you know, the great thing about doing this, in my perspective, is that I'm starting to hear a lot of musicians talk about live shows. What does it feel like after this long absence away? What do you sense from both musician and audience that have been away from this for so long?
It's very interesting. It's almost like, well, I can speak for myself, and I think I speak, you know, in talking to even, you know, people that I'm playing with now. It's almost we all appreciate it that much more because it was literally taken away. You know what I mean? To have something that you're doing and that you're so close to literally taken away, and there was nothing that you could do about it. Absolutely nothing. I think for myself, I just have now, even if there's such a thing, even a deeper appreciation of every time that I have a chance now to perform in front of people. It's even deepened that passion, that appreciation. From a technical standpoint, though, it's very interesting of what this time away has created. And now most of the concerts that I do now, there's a hybrid component. In other words, yeah, we're performing live for an audience, but at the same time, it's being streamed. You know, almost every performance that I've done has had that component. It's interesting now because I may be performing, you know, in take Sunday in Wayne, New Jersey, but there's people watching the concert, you know, in Japan, and people watching the concert all over the world. So there's even, I wouldn't say more eyes, but there is more eyes, but even you have an opportunity to actually influence, at least geographically speaking, a greater amount of different people, diverse people from all over the world at any given moment. So I think those are the two things that we've gotten out of this. You know, I haven't done any. I'm actually about to do so in a few weeks as a leader, performances as a leader, and this is something that as a leader I'm finding that, wow. I mean, it would have been so much easier just to put together, you know, the concert. I'm actually producing this particular concert and performing. And it's a series that I had been doing before the pandemic called Jazz in the Sanctuary. South Shore. And now I have this whole other component as a producer to figure out the streaming aspect, because it's almost like you can't do one without the other. I mean, I guess you can. The common practice now is that, you have both components, because people are still hesitant about coming out. So we probably won't get the live. We probably, since we will have this component of hybrid, people will be in their comfort zone of staying away and watching it on their devices, So those are the two things, just that deeper appreciation for what we do and understanding that, hey, because that never really dawned on me that something could be taken away in that manner. Yeah, I mean, if something happens to you health-wise, yes, but in terms of just something, from a governmental or political or for a world condition will cause music to cease. That you never really thought about that before, but now that, hey, that could happen. It did happen. We lived through it,
So everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, fans, students, but ultimately you live your life. You wake up every day and have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
Well, at the end of the day, I want to affect, change in a positive way to everybody that I come in contact with. I think that's what I am, a positive entity in this world, particularly in the sphere of influence that I have, whether it's students, whether it's my family, friends, and now via the internet, via streaming, as I mentioned, even from an artistic standpoint, you can get that message across to a wide spectrum of people. So that's one thing. And then at the end of the day, I have 3 daughters, and at the end of the day, I want my daughters to be able to say that, hey, my father did the best that he could, not he was the best, but every day he did the best that he could, and my wife to say the same thing. That's who I am, through music in some cases, through teaching, and even just through my presence, just to know that, that I'm impact those that I come in contact with in a positive way.
One last question I got for you is this. If you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self around the time you were really getting out there and starting out, before everything took off, and you could give your younger self one piece of advice based on your wisdom, and this isn't a regret question, but just based on the wisdom that you've accumulated over the years, what would you tell your younger self? One thing.
Wow, that's a great question. Because that's something, that's one of those questions that we do ask ourselves, I mean, it's kind of like, if I could do this over, how would I do it?
Yeah.
With the knowledge that I have. That's a really good one. I would say, in spite of, working diligently on my craft, I would probably say to never, not even for a moment, neglect the spiritual side of what you do. Sometimes, especially as young people, youngsters, you're so career driven. Everything is about career, and that's great. But at the same time, to have balance and know that that especially from your spiritual health, to make sure that it's always intact and never, take that as serious as even your career. Never neglect that, and try to have a life where distractions to that can be minimized. I would say that would be my thing, that if I could, advise myself, as a youngster, let's say, from age, 16 to 24, 25 in that time, and even maybe a little older. But that would be the thing that I would advise myself of.
Beautiful. Yoron, thank you for taking some time out today to talk with the show. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. And Joe, thank you again for having me. I wish you all the best with Neon Jazz. I know you guys, I looked at your your playlist and whatnot. I know you guys are doing some great things. Continue on doing what you're doing.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Chicago, Boston, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Yoron for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.